Spencer Critchley, I feel like I am in the Twilight Zone. How are you?
Well, I'm better today. I was not so good yesterday, like I think millions of other people. Yeah. Very, very sad, to see this happen to a country I love. Today, I think I feel more full of energy and ready to fight to protect liberal democracy.
You wrote the book, Patriots of Two Nations. Man, oh man, this election was like an illustration come to life. You had to have been thinking about what you wrote and what you were seeing.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Thank you for mentioning the book. I wish it weren't quite so accurate. This is a worse outcome than I anticipated, that's for sure. I thought by the end of the first Trump term, he had done enough things to discredit himself that would probably be, the beginning of his downfall, but I was wrong about that. I would also recommend to people, by the way, and I mentioned this guy in a Dastardly Cleverness newsletter I sent out a few days ago. Robert Kagan, the member of the Washington Post editorial board, who quit as soon as Jeff Bezos reversed their endorsement of Kamala Harris and made the paper endorse nobody. So people might not have heard of Robert Kagan before, but he is an excellent historian, and he warned back in 2016 in a Post opinion piece when Trump was elected, this is how fascism comes to America. And he was a Republican. He left the Republican Party over the nomination of Donald Trump. So he wrote this piece, which at the time was controversial, called This is How Fascism Comes to America. And earlier this year, he released a book called Rebellion, which I recommend very highly. And if I can be so presumptuous, I think it's a really good compliment to Patriots of Two Nations, my book. He makes a similar argument that these two, and he says it's two very different definitions of freedom is really his framework, have existed since the founding of the nation and have been in conflict ever since. So it tracks much of the same thinking that I do, but he also fills in lots of really good, fascinating historical detail, and he tells the story very compellingly.
Kagan is his last name?
Yeah, Robert Kagan, G-A-N, K-A-G-A-N,
Rebellion, how
Robert Kagan.
Anti-liberalism is tearing America apart again.
Yeah, and the anti-liberalism theme is crucial. Again, it's what I'm saying in Patriots of Two Nations, that we did not appreciate, most of us, the way we were educated, that a very large number of Americans never accepted liberalism, the philosophy on which liberal democracy is built. This is the philosophy that you learn about in history class that came out of the Enlightenment, the ideas of John Locke and other people, and that's where we get these concepts of individual freedom and equality and the rule of law and democratic elections. But a large number of Americans never accepted that. And so anti-liberalism has always been a strain. Most violently in the Civil War, the South was an anti-liberal alternate version of America.
Okay, the South. We know they wanted a strict slavery. They wanted all that to continue. But to me, liberalism is equality. It's like making life good for everybody. It's raising everyone up. How does someone reject that? Oh, no, I don't want fairness. I don't want you to have a chance. What am I missing?
Well, yeah, this is the subject that you and I, explore frequently, and I think it's worth exploring because it can be very hard to imagine how people could be against those ideas. But there are people who look at all of this very differently and always have. And before we go too much farther, I want to emphasize that anti-liberalism is a trend on the left as well. And so our whole model of left versus right is very confusing. It makes it harder to understand what's happening in our country to assume that everybody is somewhere on one line from left to right. You might picture, Bernie Sanders is on the pretty far left, and Rand Paul is on the far right as a libertarian. That's the line of liberalism. But there are people who reject that line. They're not on that line at all. They exist outside of liberalism. They reject liberalism. And so it's very confusing to think of Trumpists, people who really do enthusiastically support Trump, as on the far right, as if they're part of the same right that includes Bill Kristol and Tom Nichols and the Never Trumpers, or Ronald Reagan, or more traditional conservatives, Bob Dole. They're not on that line at all. And in many ways, they're hostile to that version of the right. They're hostile to the traditional Republican Party. They are anti-liberalism. So that's the anti-liberal right that Kagan is talking about. He also briefly mentions the anti-liberal left. I'm doing a lot more thinking and writing about that myself lately, and I think it needs to be explored more. This is probably not the day for it. But the anti-liberal left is the dogmatically intolerant version of the woke left, that's constantly policing people's language. There's nothing wrong with being aware of the power of language, and there's nothing wrong with asking people not to say racist or sexist things, of course. But there is a version of the left that I think we all recognize, except perhaps its own members, that comes across as very intolerant of disagreement to the point of tyranny when it's pushed to its extreme. And that is what I call the anti-liberal left. So this whole model of one left and one right and one spectrum of political opinion is very confusing. In fact, there are at least two rights and at least two lefts. And if people are interested, I go into this in more detail. I think you and I we have talked about it in my TEDx talk, which is called The War of the Worldviews. And it explains where the anti-liberal right and the anti-liberal left came from, and helps people understand them, I think, without judging them, without putting my judgments too much in the way. So, you asked the question, how could people be against, individual freedom and equality and these fundamental values that the United States was founded upon? Well, the anti-liberal right tends to be based on either religious or ethnic nationalism. And either or both of those trumps, so to speak, reason, which is what liberalism is founded on. So liberalism grew out of the Enlightenment triumph of reason. And the Enlightenment thinkers were challenging the power of the Christian church to determine what absolute truth was and what absolute morality was, and replacing the power of the Christian God and God's monarchs with human reason, which anybody had access to. And this is the incredible radicalism of figures like John Locke, but also Immanuel Kant, the philosopher Kant, who's one of his most famous comments is "dare to think." And so this idea that was very revolutionary, that human beings, each human being using reason, could decide for themselves and could govern themselves, and that they all had equal value and all had an equal right to be free. It was a very revolutionary way of thinking about everything. And there were many people who rejected that, and not just because they were reactionaries or trying to cling to their power, although of course that was the case among many of them. But they just thought that was wrong because they sincerely believed in God. And they, from their point of view, for example, they sincerely believe in God. So these would be the religious nationalists. And they would say, you are out of your mind. We already know that the Christian God created this world and is all-powerful and all-knowing. Why would we put ourselves above God? That's insane and evil. It says so right in the Bible, right? Now, you don't have to agree with that, but if you can imagine thinking that way, right? It would look insane to you and dangerous to put human beings who are, fallen and, born in a condition of sin and have nothing like, of course, the mental horsepower of the ruler and creator of the universe. Why would you do that? So that's religious nationalism, and you have people who sincerely believe that to this day. So they oppose Enlightenment liberalism for that reason, and they want America to become a Christian nation. And not only that, many of them want it to be a theocracy that's ruled by the law, by God's law. It's very similar to Sharia law in the Islamic world for the Islamic fundamentalists. Then the ethnic nationalists, their view is you can't create a nation just based on this social contract that these Enlightenment rationalists are talking about. You learned about this in high school history as well, that a nation is formed by a social contract where people agree to live together according to the same constitution, the same laws. And they said, my God, that takes the soul of the nation out of the picture and turns it into like the equivalent of a business contract. And they would say, no, Germany is the nation of the Germans. It has a soul. It's tied to the land. It has a culture. And if you ignore all of that, it's meaningless. Furthermore, it's a very dangerous world. And so the Germans, if they don't band together as Germans, they'll constantly be invaded, like, the way Napoleon invaded them in the early 19th century. And similar, Italy for the Italians, Japan for the Japanese. And so ethnic nationalists look at rational liberalism and the social contract and say, good God, no, you're taking away everything that's valuable in this nation and turning it into this soulless, bureaucratic, legalistic contract. And this might remind people of how much the Trump right hates globalists, people they see as having no ties to any particular nation and no loyalty to any particular nation in their view. And so this is why, to them, it's far more important to have America for the Americans and to put America first and recognize it's a dangerous world and we must be Americans first. And furthermore, it has to be people who really are part of the American culture, not these foreigners and aliens who are not. Now, of course, that is directly counter to the intention of the founders. That is directly counter. Both of these ideas are directly counter to the intentions of the founders, both religious and ethnic nationalism. They are anti-American ideas, but the response of the religious and ethnic nationalists who are part of the Trump movement would be, no, well, yeah, we're anti your version of American, and we're anti the John Locke version of American. But what we are in favor of is what God wants America to be, or what the national spirit, the national soul of America wants to be. So what we stand for is the true America, and yours is the false and even evil version of America. So I guess I just summarized my book, and then as long as that answer it was much shorter than the book. So.
Spencer, though, one thing that people seem reluctant, well, unless you're a woman, people seem very, very reluctant to try to figure out what role misogyny played. I mean, we've seen in a lot of these voting results that a huge block that went for Donald Trump were Hispanic men, very, very traditional, very sort of, stereotypically set in, a man's a man and a woman's a woman and the man's the boss kind of a mentality. I don't know that there will ever be any real way to quantify it, because even if somebody is talking to a reporter or a pollster, I mean, who's going to say, oh, yeah, I voted for him for racism because, I really hate black people, or I voted for him because, only a man should be a president. Women just don't have what it takes. Yeah. Look at the numbers. Kamala Harris's numbers are so close to exactly the people who voted for Hillary Clinton. It's stunning.
Is that right? I hadn't seen that. I actually thought she had done worse than Clinton in some ways.
Yeah, they were within a very, they both, when looking back over the different elections, how many votes did Biden get in this one and that one? How many votes did Trump get? How many votes did Hillary get? How many votes did Kamala get? When I last saw those two numbers, Hillary's vote totals and Kamala's vote totals were really, really ridiculously close.
Isn't that something? And I thought Harris was a far more effective campaigner. I would, clearly I think sexism played a role in this. I would not say that all, and I don't think this is what you're suggesting, all Hispanic men, rejected, all the ones who voted for Trump. It was only sexism. I think it's very important to recognize that there were multiple reasons why she lost. We need to get the data before we can really know. And some of it we'll never be able to know for sure. But my initial impression is that there's a list of reasons why this happened. Sexism.
Well, I think there is a list of reasons, but I think I don't see how. I don't know what kind of data collection technique you could use to get to the truth of somebody, because you see some people saying, well, it was the economy. Oh, yeah, really? Yeah. Do you even know what the word economy means? It's like this coverall. Oh, it's inflation. Yeah. Because, I think it's about time the cops got tough on black people. Look at all the crime, and let's get these immigrants out of our country. And damn, women need to know their place. I was mentioning to my previous guest, John Murphy, there's a trend on TikTok today of young men posting comments on young women's TikToks, and it just says, "Your body, my choice." That is where we are, Spencer. That is what this country is.
Yeah. Well, I would say on my list, one of the list items is failure of civic virtue, to use the technical term. And I wrote about this for about a week ago as well. One of the founders' greatest fears was that they knew that the system they had designed, as amazing as it is, the system of checks and balances in the Constitution, it could never succeed without virtue in the populace, in the electorate. And virtue is an old-fashioned sounding word, which is kind of a shame and part of our problem. It doesn't just mean virtue in the sense of,
it means accepting norms morally and guardrails.
It's a more ancient concept that refers to it's more like our modern word character.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're an adult, being an actual adult who's serious and accepts the responsibilities of a citizen seriously enough to at least be minimally well informed and to take your vote seriously and to try to use reason in your decisions and to have integrity and honesty. These are the elements of virtue as the founders understood it, and they wrote about this, in multiple locations. They were very worried about what would happen if the American people lost the spirit of '76, as they called it, and they could even see that happening in early years after the revolution. They already saw people reverting to their normal kind of self-interestedness and scheming and backbiting and backstabbing and being kind of normal human beings. So they were very worried about that, and I think that is a very serious problem that we're facing. It sounds very much like you're being, a moralistic scold, something liberals tend to have a reputation for, unfortunately. But I think this is a very important point, that you cannot enjoy the right of freedom if you don't accept the responsibility of freedom. If you don't have this kind of civic virtue, you might think you're more free because you don't have to bother yourself with all this boring stuff like actually researching the candidates you vote for. But in fact, you are less free. You're sacrificing your freedom and making yourself vulnerable to every demagogue who comes along and who can sway you just by their celebrity power or, their convincing, emotion-laden lies. So I think that's definitely part of it. And I think we have to be careful. We have to balance not insulting voters, because you will never win an election by telling voters, how reprehensible they are and how they should do better. It doesn't matter how right you are. You're just going to alienate them. But at the same time, I think that has to be balanced with respecting them enough to talk to them as if they're capable of being responsible adults, with not just consuming the benefits of democracy, but meeting the expectations of being a free citizen in a democracy. Though we do, I think, and it's going to be hard to do, but it's important to stop infantilizing voters and making every election into, in effect, a vending machine with competing companies promising to deliver more and more for less and less expectation. So I think that's a big problem, and it's endemic on the right and the left. But if you make a nation of babies, basically fretful babies who must have our every need satisfied immediately or will revolt, that's not freedom. That's dependency and subjugation, really, because you are at the mercy of whoever manipulates you most effectively. You can only really be free if you're capable of thinking critically and making informed choices in your own self-defense against manipulation. But as I say, I think that there's a list of reasons, and if I could, I have two that I think for me are most important, and I'm going to be focusing on them. If I could bring those up.
Sure. We have about a minute before we have to break.
Well, maybe I can introduce them, and maybe if you're interested, we could talk a little more.
And I was also hoping we'd have some time to take some calls as well, but go ahead.
Yeah, let's do that if we can, for sure. So in one line, I would say what we just saw was the power of the Trump brand and the death of the liberal brand.
Yes.
And I hope there's a path to resurrection of the liberal brand. And then point two is related to that, and that is the worldwide rejection of liberalism, the philosophy of liberalism. And that's a crisis in democracies across the world.
Yeah. I'm talking to Spencer Critchley. His book, which you should read, is Patriots of Two Nations. And boy, oh boy, it has never been more resonant. He also does a podcast called Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. We have a number of callers who are waiting to join the conversation. Hopefully in this break, I'm also going to catch up on some of the texts that you have sent. Again, that number to join our conversation is 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. I also want to let you know, I'm supposed to tell you this every day, and I always forget. If you go to SoundCloud, where we used to post our shows, we have not posted new shows to SoundCloud. We stopped using the old episodes are there, but you're not going to find new episodes of the show. You actually have to subscribe to Joan Esposito Live, Local, and Progressive as a podcast. There's Joan Esposito full episodes and Joan Esposito featured interviews. So that's where you can find some of these talks, because I know sometimes, Spencer, people like to listen to you twice. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Spencer Critchley, author of Patriots of Two Nations. One of the texts that I read over the break, Spencer, well, first of all, they promoted you. They call you Dr. Critchley, which I think is kind of nice. But they're kind of mad. They're a little bit mad. So because they say, my apologies to Dr. Critchley. We lose more ground every day that we try to understand, analyze what the Trumper believes. Who cares at this point?
Yeah.
The country needs to be protected from their leaders' psychotic plans.
Well, actually, yeah. So here's the point. If you want to win, you have to understand your opponent. And I think one reason Democrats lose way too many elections than they should is because they don't understand their opponent, and they don't understand how they're being beaten. So I don't want to be understood here as saying, you know what, if we could just be a little more patient and understanding with these folks, maybe someday they'll come around. No, I'm talking about I want to beat them convincingly in elections. I want to build towards a Democratic landslide. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, one other comment directed at you. Well, of course, now I've lost. The only thing confusing is your guest. He means neoliberal. Neoliberals is what he's talking about. Are you talking about neoliberals?
No. There's a lot of confusion about what the word liberalism means, and part of that confusion is in the word neoliberal. That refers to economics, so it's like it refers to the what was considered the revival of liberal economics, which is basically free market economics. Which is related to political liberalism, but it's not identical with political liberalism. When I say liberalism, I'm just referring to the principles on which the country was founded, and they are not all that complicated. It's just the list of individual freedom, equality, the rule of law, democratic elections, there's really not a very long list when you come down to the essence of liberalism. Now, most people on the left in the United States wholeheartedly believe in those principles, but there's a version of the left that considers them actually, in the end, oppressive. And this ends up becoming the Marxist tradition and then the post-Marxist tradition that we have now. And we don't have time to get into all of that right now, I don't think. But those people, for what they think are very good reasons, think liberalism was really just a ruse to keep the bourgeoisie in power and to prevent the true workers' revolution that's needed to completely overthrow the whole system. But I think, within liberalism, you can be, as they say, Bernie Sanders, AOC. You can be over that far to the left within liberalism and still be a liberal. But if you reject liberalism, and many people, not a majority, but a significant minority of people on the left do, you're not a liberal. And what I'm saying is liberals need to understand the differences and make up their minds whether or not they're actually liberals, because the anti-liberal left's ideas, they're explicitly opposed to liberalism, and you can't be both liberal and anti-liberal at the same time.
One thing that I want to comment on, I saw this yesterday and today, not quite so much in the calls, but in the texts. Spencer, I don't know about you, but when my political favorites win elections, I feel pretty good about that. I feel, pretty upbeat and pretty excited. Everybody who's reaching out to me, who apparently were Trump voters, they're still angry. They're saying, the texts, I've said this before. Obviously, people feel a lot freer when they text me. They often let their freak flag fly. But I have not seen, as I texted somebody back yesterday who'd gone on this rant, and I was like, your candidate won. You should be happy. What is with all the hate? It's like they still, even when they win, they can't stop being angry. I am very, very, very puzzled by it. I need to start taking some of these calls, or we're never going to get these people on the air. Lady B, do we still have Everett on the line from Chicago? Everett, you are on with me and Spencer Critchley. Please go ahead.
Well, I'm very optimistic about the future.
Well, good.
And, sure. I think that it's kind of ridiculous to expect a candidate to win in 100 days against a candidate who's been campaigning for 4 years.
You know what, Everett? I think that's a really important point, and that's one point that some of the pundits have pointed out. There was such a groundswell for Trump. I don't know if it would have made a difference, but Spencer, why don't you join this conversation? A lot of people have been weighing in on she didn't have enough time. That if Joe Biden had said right after the midterms, that's it, I'm stepping aside, that whomever would have been the candidate would have had time to really get out there and make sure people understood who they were and what they wanted to do. Could you address Everett's point?
Well, that's on my list of one of the factors, and I think we have to recognize there are many factors. Including a lot of voters will say it's inflation. Now, I've got a good answer to that, but they still believe that inflation was Biden's fault and therefore Harris's fault. And a lot of voters believe that whatever problems they have with the border are all Biden's and Harris's fault. And I think we should take them at their word, even if we think they're misinterpreting what's going on. Similarly, I think it's true that we asked Harris to do a nearly impossible task, and she did it as well as anybody could ever have done it, I would say. I wouldn't take anything away from her. But I think if I'm hearing you right, Joan, I think I agree with what you're saying. Looking at the swing in all kinds of districts among all different segments of the population, including, really blue parts of the country, this swing towards Trump, I can't imagine that that's anything other than a historically significant phenomenon. And looking at the course over the past few election cycles and seeing these numbers declining, I don't think it's just that. I think it's important, and we should recognize Harris had an incredibly difficult challenge, and she did very well considering. And with more time, I think maybe she could have squeaked out a win. But why would it? I guess my point is, why should it even be close against somebody as awful as Trump and as incredibly qualified as Harris? With that contrast, how could it even be close? So, and then looking at this swing across groups across the country, I think Democrats need to take that very seriously. That's a big rejection of the Democratic Party, and we have to understand why.
Rosie from the south suburbs is on the line, and she told Lady B, and I'm sure she'll tell you in a second, that she's confused how people voted for Trump, who is a convicted felon and a rapist. Rosie, you're on with me and Spencer. Did you want to ask him that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm just after the election, I was just like so confused. I'm still very angry. I have a lot of friends that are teachers, and they vote for Trump, and I get so angry because they're voting against their own causes. It's like, he wants to do away with the Board of Education. You're a teacher. Like, why are
he wants to get rid of the entire cabinet level education bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they're disbanding the books, and it's just like you're voting against your own causes. You chose Trump, and it's almost like I don't even want to talk to my teacher friends. I'm so angry right now. I only want to talk to Democrats. These people do not do research. They're just watching Fox News, and why we propagandize. It's like we're propagandizing ourselves. It's like Russia. It's like they're only watching Fox News, and that's all they're hearing is what Fox News is saying, and they propagandize themselves. When we have a free and fair country where you can watch all of the news and learn about all the aspects, and just like you said, they don't do enough research. They listen to what their mom says and their dad says, and then they go and vote for Trump, and now here we are today.
Yeah, well, I think that's another item on the list. I would say that we should consider is the power of the media bubble that folks are living in, and the related power of the social media disinformation they're getting. And so I think you're very right. They're living in effect in an alternate universe where contrary ideas, many of them, they're not even aware of facts that contradict their thoughts because they can live in a media bubble where they never encounter those ideas. And if they do, they can just be dismissed as lies. So every bad thing you ever hear about Trump is just a lie made up by the liberal media, or it was justified because, he's, as the saying goes, he's an a-hole, but he's our a-hole. Because they see him as a heroic champion for their kind of Americans. And one thing I would add to that, that I cannot emphasize enough, and this can be very hard for people to hear, but this is based on my long experience doing marketing and PR and social media and all different forms of communications for social good causes, essentially, including Democratic political campaigns, but also nonprofits and such. I frequently would tell clients, we must love humanity, but at the same time, we must drastically lower our expectations. There's this noble savage myth that holds that if we just removed the profit motive and took the selfishness out of the design of our society and stopped pitting people against each other, we could have a system where people would be their natural selves, which is cooperative and helpful and peaceful. And I'm sorry, that's not true. And there's all kinds of scientific research in anthropology and biology and psychology and archaeology that backs this up. Human nature is complicated, and much of it is extremely dark. And that's in all people. And when you give people the opportunity to only hear what they want to hear and to make choices that flatter their prejudices, whatever those prejudices are, and to take the easy way out and to indulge their petty anger and resentment and even to be sadistic towards other people, if you make that okay, Many people will accept that invitation, and especially if you give them a moral justification for it. So, and Trumpism does that. It enlists people in this heroic and holy crusade to save the nation against these evil invaders and these evil, perverts and sickos and others. And the combination of moral justification and flattery and lies, and the invitation to now you can let all your rage out, all the rage you've picked up through the course of your life, and we all have some. And here's an enemy you can direct it towards, and you can feel morally justified in that. And again, I don't want to both sides of this, but people on the left are prone to this as well. Identify somebody who is okay to hate. Not to the same extent,
though. There aren't as many, and they're not as loud.
They're not as dangerous. I mean, it's happened in the past, of course, under communist dictatorships. But what I don't want to downplay that what we're seeing now is whatever is happening on the left is nowhere near as dangerous as what's happening on the right, which is extremely dangerous, including literally physically dangerous in many cases when you see, innocent people slaughtered because they're black and they're, shopping in a grocery store in Buffalo and they have to die because they're black, or, synagogues being attacked in the whole long, awful list.
Spencer, we're going to take a real quick break. Rosie, thank you for that call. We're going to take a quick break and try to jam in as many calls as we can right after that.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by newly anointed Dr. Spencer Critchley. Thank you for that little promotion that one of our texters gave. We are going to try to get some phone calls in. Debbie's on the line from Old Town. Debbie, you're on with me and Spencer. Go ahead.
Hey, how are you guys doing? I'm not doing good.
Yeah. Comes and goes.
Anyway, I'm very. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I've got to say this right off the bat, and I'm really skeptical of people who are. I want to know how we didn't get one swing state, how we were millions and millions and millions of votes that nobody voted, that it was such a low. It seemed like people were registering left and right early. There were lines everywhere. I was in Wisconsin campaigning for her, canvassing, and people were thrilled and excited and couldn't wait. The campaign office had so many people in it that you couldn't even stand in line. You had to wait outside the door. And we didn't get one swing state, and states that went all blue, even on abortion rights and everything. Oh, he won the presidency of that state.
It does seem difficult to wrap your head around it. But I really, truly do believe, as much as I hate this result, Debbie, that this was a free and fair election. I remember when Obama had midterms and lost both houses, and he said, yep, we got spanked. Well, we got spanked. And I understand your questioning, but there's no evidence that there was hanky-panky. And there were, as you said, I saw estimates that anywhere from 14 to 18 million registered Democrats did not vote at all. And I don't know what the hell to make about that.
Man, they should be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah.
My God,
yeah.
If there was ever a time to bother to vote.
Yep. Hey, you know what?
Don't let one of them ever utter a word of complaint during the Trump administration.
Yeah. Well, I didn't tell you this. We got a caller earlier somebody who told Lady B, well, I didn't vote, but I want to talk about why I think this happened. And I said to Lady B, I said, no, you didn't vote. No. You don't get a voice on this station today. I want to take John's call from Des Plaines. John, you're on with me and Spencer. You told Lady B that you were worried about a depression. I think that's an important thing to talk about.
Well, I believe that things are right. If you look back to the 20s and the 30s and the way things were, and Hoover was a better guy than this guy that is coming in now. And the thing is, right now we've got people working, spending money, even though there's the inflation. And I think that the Republicans are going to use the inflation item to say we have got to get this inflation out, and that means a lot of people will be out of work, and then when they're out of work, prices are going to come down, but things are going to be very stable, and I just see too much with similarity. Just the way things were then, and we needed a guy like Roosevelt in there to bring us out of it. And unfortunately, then there was the war and all that there. But all that there's so much similarity. We've got Ukraine
John,
right now.
I got an email that dovetails with what you're saying. And Spencer, I'll read this to you. Somebody is saying that they were talking to their sister, and the sister told her that somebody they know worked at this company that just recently sat their employees down and said that they are going to try to restrict bonuses because they're going to try to pre-buy materials to avoid any tariffs. And there's also rumors that the Steve Madden Shoe Company is now looking outside of China because they believe tariffs are coming. I mean, this could be an economic disaster of unprecedented size, Spencer.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be good, and I hope that I saw that same email about the people not getting their Christmas bonuses. I hope it's authentic because it's such a good object lesson. The employees were saying, "What do you mean you can't pay our bonuses because of Trump's tariffs?" He said China pays for those. The other countries pay for those tariffs, and their executives had to explain to them how tariffs actually work. And it was
whether it's true or apocryphal, it illustrates the point.
It illustrates the point perfectly, and people will be having those experiences, and they will find that everything that's imported gets more expensive, and furthermore, domestically made products will get more expensive too, because that's what happens. If the Chinese products price goes up, so does the American-made products price. And this could depress economic growth, and it could have serious impacts. And then there are other cockamamie ideas that Trump has, giving. Once again, of course, there are going to be these big tax breaks, which he will sell as, look what I'm doing for you, my, working and middle-class supporters. And then, 90% of the benefits will go to the people at the very top and jack up the debt. And then we'll be carrying all that extra interest on the debt. And so, there are lots of ways this could go very wrong. Trump's economic record was mediocre at best. He made all these promises for bringing back manufacturing jobs that did not happen. Biden's record, by contrast, has been far better by every measure. Yes, inflation spiked for reasons that have happened around the globe and were not Biden's fault, and he brought it down faster than anybody else managed to. Trump his economic ideas are idiotic. He's bringing in people who are hostile to the idea of a government role in the economy. They want a radically free market. And those ideas are not just a problem for liberals who believe that government services are valuable from a humane point of view. But Keynesian economics works pretty well, even just in terms of prosperity for everybody, including the rich. And that means you have a free market, but it's regulated, because when you don't, you had what we had in the 19th century, which was recessions and depressions basically every 10 years or so. This is one reason why people thought capitalism might just fail, because until the middle of the 20th century, it was failing every 10 years or so with these terrible crashes. And then it turned out John Maynard Keynes' theories about the way we should manage that turned out to be pretty much right. And that's why now actual depressions are rare.
Well, I think I think things are going. Well, even Elon Musk said, "Oh yeah, there's going to be a lot of pain because we're going to have to crash everything before we build it back up again." Anyway, let's squeeze in one more call. Roosevelt, we got to be quick. We got a couple of minutes here. Roosevelt's on the line from Chicago to talk about Latino voters. Hey, Roosevelt, you're on with me and Spencer Critchley. Go ahead.
Okay, to add on, misogyny, prejudice, protest vote. What I'm referring to is I do listen to shows in Spanish, so I wanted to give you guys the insight.
Yes.
Okay, so here we go. Gaza was big. Gaza was big. It was mentioned almost daily. And they would fault Biden and the Democratic Party. Never would bring up Trump about Gaza and what would happen in the future. Okay? Also, never promoted people to go vote until the last week. The lady that's in charge never did that. I did that, and I would tell her, you got to promote people of we're the ones that vote the least. Okay? So, no, never did that until the last week. Too little, too late. Venezuelans, big. Because 6 months ago, I told them, today is the Venezuelans you criticize. And be careful who you criticize, because tomorrow is going to be you. And look what happened. Big point there. Money, the amount of money that our VP got, she got more than Trump. That was big. To the point that today a Trump supporter said she was wearing a $20,000 necklace on her. Papers. The fact that the Democrats have promised to reform immigration reform and never come through.
Roosevelt, I got to cut you off. We're coming down the home stretch here. Spencer, thank you for that report, though, Roosevelt. That's important to know.
No, that isn't. Those are important insights. And if I could just quickly add, my friend Mike Madrid's book, The Latino Century, is very good. He's one of the top Latino voting experts in the country. He's a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. So his book, The Latino Century, is just excellent on the Latino vote and how Democrats have tended to misunderstand Latino voters.
Okay, for your reading list, listeners, we've got Spencer Critchley's Patriots of Two Nations. Jessica Valenti wrote the book Abortion, and Robert Kagan wrote the book Rebellion, how anti-liberalism is tearing America apart again. You have your assignments. Go to your local independent bookstore. Do not go to Amazon for these books. We are done supporting Jeff Bezos in every way we can possibly cut back. Spencer, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Joan. I appreciate it.